Hello and welcome to Thoughts in the Green Room with your host, Jeff Mays. This week's topic, regret. Now, when I think about regret, I hear the thousands of voices, thousands of people mourning the loss of something that they could have said or done differently in any given moment. Now, the sense of loss, this sense of mourning, comes from the idea that had the person done or said something differently in any given moment, then the outcome which they perceive as negative would have been a positive in their life. Now, the key word here is the word perceived. And it's because of this little word perceived that I go through life without any regrets. Now, don't get me wrong. If I had a crystal ball or a magic ball and I could look inside of it and I could change something in my life, then I would be very interested in seeing what that alternate timeline would be. But let's be clear. I'm not talking about actually changing the moment and living it out. I'm just talking about the novelty of seeing what could potentially be different. And I only want to see this novelty or have this idea of the novelty rather than truly live it differently, because I don't live with any regret. Now, this point has been challenged to me many, many times in my life, and to this day, I firmly disagree. Life can be lived without regret. To support that, I want to share with you a little bit of a story. Like many, I was a angst-ridden teenager, and I railed and screamed and hollered at the world every single chance that I could get. The world, in my perception, was an absolutely horrible place that could be fixed through the if-onlys. If only I could have caught that football and made it to the football team. If only I could have said the right witty thing to the cute girl and made it into the in crowd. If only. And the list went on and on and on. See, it was my perception that life would be better. If only I'd caught that football, then this current angst-ridden teen moment would be a better moment in the history of my life. If only. One day a teacher suggested me that, Jeff, maybe you should look for some positives in life and live for the pleasure rather than spending your energy railing against it. Now, I was fortunately at a time and a point in my life where I could receive the advice, and so I began to do so. I carried on my back like a cape a list of regrets, a list of if-onlys, but although I carried them with them and knew that my life would be better if I could change them, at least moving forward I could find some pleasure in life, and life became okayish. Are you one of those people? Think about it. And let me tell you, continue the story about how that changed for me. Many years after life became okayish, one of my good friends suggested to me that I go out and try a particular restaurant. The suggestion came from a reliable source. My friend was usually quite good with recommendations, and he had made this recommendation specifically because this restaurant had produced the best food my friend had ever ate in his entire life. At my earliest convenience with this great recommendation, I went off to the restaurant and I had the absolutely worst meal of my entire life. I returned home that day and told my friend about my experience. My friend quickly rebutted and suggested that I give them a second chance. A little bit hesitantly, I went back to the restaurant at a later date, and although I didn't have the worst meal of my life, it was pretty darn close. I returned home that night and regaled my friend of my horrific and horrible meal. Questioned him, of course, on his recommendation and where he thought he was coming from, because, like I said, usually he had a pretty good sense and pretty great recommendations, and decided to write the restaurant off. Much to my surprise, my friend persisted. They insisted that I try them yet again for a third try, and, much to my surprise, a few weeks later I found myself sitting in the restaurant, whereupon I had the absolute best meal of my entire life. Now, this food experience has taught me two key lessons. The first lesson is this. One, everything should be tried at least 3 times in life. If you try things 3 times and you are given a fair sample of whatever it is you're doing or dealing with, and from that fair sample you can then make an educated and fair judgment on whether or not that thing fits into your life or whether it does not fit into your life. Now, if you don't necessarily agree or you're unsure about this idea of trying everything 3 times, I'd like to take a moment to remind you that there is a global sport based on the 3-strike principle. And I have to say that the millions upon millions of fans and the creators of baseball, well, they can't be all that wrong. Now, can they? The second thing that I learned from that food experience brings me back to regret. But before I go there, I want to pause for just a second and add another thought that has come to me over the years about regret. The most common thing that I hear around regret is this. If only I had one more moment with them. If only I could see them one more time. This statement, which I'm sure many of you have heard, is in reference to a person who has passed from this world and is no longer with us. And the person saying the if only statement, sharing their regret, will never get the chance to say what they need to say because the person is no longer with us. This, of course, also applies to friends, family, and loved ones who, through some mishap, misconception, or calamity in the relationship, is no longer willing to talk to you or the person who has a regret because they don't want to be part of your life anymore. A relationship soured to the point where there is no reconciliation. And for both of these circumstances, I offer the obituary rule. The obituary rule is really simple. Say often and say frequently to your friends, your family, your loved ones, anyone who you care about, anything that you would say if you were called upon to write their obituary. The value in this is fairly straightforward in my opinion. One, it lets the person know how you feel about them regularly. 2, it means that if you and that person have any level of conflict or challenge, because you've expressed regularly and often the things that make them wonderful in your life, it's easier to mitigate the challenge. And 3, if we look at it as a 3-strike principle, interestingly enough, 3, it means that you reduce and potentially remove the issue of regret in your life because you will never have that opportunity to say, if only, because you will have already said it. Now, I have shared this tidbit of information with many people over my life, and I have been questioned. Where did I get this? How did I figure this out? Who taught me this seemingly great lesson? And that brings me back to the food that my friend insisted I try 3 times. As I sat there in that restaurant that evening, having the best meal of my entire life, I realized in that moment that the food itself may not necessarily be the best food in the world, but it was the best food in that moment, in part because of the 2 horrific experiences which I had had previously. The food now, offset against horror, was fabulous. The second I made this realization, I immediately applied that food lesson to my entire life. And I removed from my back all the if-onlys, I removed all the regrets, and the world instantly became a place of wonder and joy. You see, I love where I am right now, and every second of every day, no matter where it is or what it is, or how it's going or how it isn't going based on what I'm hoping that it will be doing. I love it all. And the reason I love it all is because I have a very clear vision of where I'm going and what I want to achieve and what I want to do in the world for myself. And the reason I have that clarity is because of all those experiences that are behind me. And if we apply the food lesson to all those experiences behind me as I did, what I recognized was that all those things I regretted, all those things that were horrific experiences for me that I wished I could change, they were the same as the 2 horrific meals, and they were the offset and the balance to the present moment that I live. And I live the life my life in the present. And that means that everything behind me, no matter what it looked like then, it is a positive experience because it helps me enjoy today and brings me where I am today. Ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you to live life without regret. I encourage you to live life in the present, experiencing this moment for what it is. Because if you take and you change anything, if you change one thing from your past, then you may not be where you are today. And what would that be like if you didn't have, fill in whatever it is that is bringing you joy in this moment because you are on a different track? Those are your thoughts from the Green Room for this week. I will see you in a few weeks.